are we getting along with Wednesday's program, Carol?
Well, we haven't got very far yet. Well, the only things you've decided on are a Gracie Field song for the lady in Rochester and a rock and roll number for the granny in Wales.
Well, the things they asked for.
But you did say you'd rather like to start the program with a hospital request.
Oh, so I did. Well, what have we got?
Here.
So here's a good one. As patients in Ward 4, we would like to convey our gratitude to all the nurses, kind and cheerful, who comfort us when we are tearful. For more than medicine and pills, their kind attention cures our ills. So please select a tune to raise their spirits and convey our praise. It's from Mrs. Quinn, Ward 4, Royal Hospital, Endon.
Oh, that's where my sister works. She's in Ward 4 as well.
I bet you planted that letter.
No, I didn't, honestly. I didn't even notice the address.
Oh, all right. Well, I've got a weakness for nurses myself anyway. Ward 4 it is.
Well, can I tell Peggy? Because otherwise she might not be listening.
Oh, that's a good idea. And since you have a sister there, you can pick the record yourself.
Oh, lovely. Thank you.
After my sister had told me about the record that had been requested for the nurses in our ward, I thought how appreciative patients are about the work we do. We receive many kindnesses that give us an added zest for the job. And yet it's surprising how hazy people are in general about the different types of training for nurses. They may have heard about state-registered nurses like Sister. They probably know that her basic training took 3 years, with a lot of studying both during and after the course. But state-enrolled nurses are not nearly so well known. And yet a lot of the nursing in our hospital is done by people like myself, who took a 2-year practical course. We're properly trained as nurses, and we've learned by actually doing the job at the bedside, without a lot of theory and lectures. I first became interested after I'd had my appendix out during my last year at school. As soon as I was well enough, the nurses let me do little jobs about the ward. Perhaps at the time I was a bit carried away by the glamour of hospital life, but the idea of doing things for others took hold of me as well, and my mind was made up. As I had to wait a year before I could start, I went to see Matron. I needed to make sure that I was, in fact, the right sort of person to take up nursing. If her answer was encouraging, then I wanted some advice on what job to do in the meanwhile. She told me that anything that taught me about human beings would help me to be a good nurse. So I worked in a children's day nursery for 8 months and loved every minute of it. You meet plenty of human nature when you're dealing with 20 or so live wires like this lot. I was terribly sad when later in the year the nursery closed down, and I had to look for something else. The next job was a complete change, but fun too in a different way. I got a real pleasure in helping the customers with their purchases. All the same, I was still looking forward to the time when I'd be old enough to start in hospital. On the day we were fitted with our uniforms, I had a pleasant surprise. I found that I already knew someone who was starting on the same course. Her daughter used to be at my school. Mrs. Bennet seemed a bit nervous. I wondered why.
I admit I was a little nervous when I started nursing. It was 20 years since I'd been out of work. How would I get on with these young people? Would I learn as quickly as they? Of course, in my own home, I was well used to having plenty of youngsters about the place. My own 3 were always having their friends in. I enjoyed meeting them and I got on well with them. But a relationship at work might be a different matter. With the children all out in jobs and a husband who has to go abroad, sometimes for months on end, I felt I needed an interest outside the home. Robert had always pulled my leg about wanting to take on lame ducks. Being a technical chap himself, he thoroughly approved of my getting a training to do the job professionally, as he put it. We'd decided that after I'd done my training, I might consider nursing part-time if I found full-time too much for me. Once we started the course, we were soon put at ease. The tutor knew how strange it would be, so almost the first thing she did was to take us round the hospital, explaining the work of the specialized departments and introducing us to the people in charge of the wards. The atmosphere was so friendly and welcoming that we sensed we'd soon feel at home. Sisters, of course, were people we knew about, but most of us were surprised to find that the male equivalent is called a charge nurse. We first had 4 weeks in the preliminary training school, interspersed with periods of actual nursing. I found my knowledge of housekeeping was useful for such things as special diets. But other subjects were new and fascinating to me. Anatomy, for instance. It had never occurred to me that our innards fit together for all the world like a 3-dimensional jigsaw puzzle, or that you can feel the pulse in various parts of the body.
I'd heard about finding your feet or losing your heart, but a stomach gone astray didn't make sense at all. And as for skeletons that don't live in family cupboards, well, it was a good thing the tutor was at hand to put us right. That was what I liked about the training school, an informal atmosphere and all the help we needed. The purpose of our 4 weeks there was to start us off with some theory and a lot more practical work. Although it was pretty obvious they couldn't let a bunch of raw recruits practice on sick people until we'd learned at least some of the elementary rules of nursing, we didn't have to wait long before we met real patients. We helped to look after them, working as part of the nursing team. We liked that. It gave us confidence from the start. I remember the first time a patient called me nurse. I couldn't think who he meant at first. At the end of 4 weeks in the school, each of us was allocated to a ward where we stayed for 3 months before moving on. You might think that anyone could wash and dry a patient's heels without much training, but there's more to it than that. Certain parts of the body might develop bed sores, so we learned how the circulation could be stimulated. An unspectacular job, but very important for the comfort of the patient. The work became more interesting each day. Working in a hospital wasn't as dramatic as we expected. In this calm, orderly atmosphere, we didn't feel as if we were snatching patients from the jaws of death. And yet, we were becoming very much part of the team that helps them to get better. Most of us, well, the young ones anyway, got quite a thrill when we reached the stage of helping the doctor. There was a young man in our group, and he moved round the different wards too, but always on the male side. Wherever we went, or whatever we did, there was someone in charge to keep an eye on our work. Of course, things didn't always go according to plan. I blotted my copybook more than once. I thought he was going to burst a blood vessel, and I felt pretty upset myself. Sister, bless her, soothed him down quickly. But I thought I'd never hear the end of it. When I met him next day, he still looked fierce, but it turned out to be a leg pull. He told Dr. Baker that I always kept him standing about in puzzles, and made some crack about having a pair of Wellingtons handy. If you've got a good relationship in a ward, you can survive most disasters, small or large. During our training, we were able to visit places of interest. There are careers open to us outside hospital life, and we had a chance to see some of them. In factory clinics, for instance, enrolled nurses are often employed. A sister is in charge, but the enrolled nurse does much of the practical nursing. Interesting for us to see a field different from our own. Sometimes there are jobs going as school matrons or with private cases. Occasionally there are posts abroad too, and enrolled nurses can also work with the local authority services. Learning about these opportunities made us realize that there's plenty of scope for people of our type of training, though I must admit that most of us settled for hospital life in the end. Home nursing is rather special, because the district nurse frequently becomes the friend of the family. She may be faced with problems quite outside her normal nursing duties, and often becomes a much-loved personality in her neighborhood. After the first year, we had a written test, just a half-hour paper. It was the only one in the whole course. Thank goodness, exams have never been my strong point. Then followed a practical test in our own ward. This was not too terrifying either, because we were familiar with our patients and with their treatments. We all passed our assessment, as it's called, and went on to extend our nursing experience while completing our second year. I don't want to give the impression it was all work. We had definite times off each day, as well as whole days off, so we could plan things in advance. And believe me, we made good use of our leisure. As well as sport, there were lots of opportunities for hobbies and other interests. For example, twice a year, some of the staff organized a flower show. Really lovely, some of the arrangements. I became friendly with a young man from the Path Lab, and we had a lot of fun together. That winter, a dancing class was all the go, but we had activities in our social club to suit all tastes. One great thing about hospital life, you can't possibly be lonely.
Ace and Jack. Pontoon.
At the beginning of the second year, I went to work in casualty. We were still moving to a new department every 3 months so that we could get a full range of experience. And bit by bit, we were gaining the sense of responsibility that turns raw recruits into real nurses. That's not to say things don't happen to one sometimes. One squally day, I was on theatre duty and arrived absolutely drenched. I'd been delayed because of the storm, but hoped my wet hair wouldn't be noticed with the headgear on. My 3 months in the operating theatre came towards the end of the course. There's a sort of concentrated quietness there, everyone intent on his job. The plight of a nurse in this dedicated atmosphere is the last thing anyone wants to be bothered about. My place was at the foot of the table. I began to feel most uncomfortable. The water was starting to ooze through and trickle down my neck. All went well till the anaesthetist happened to glance my way. He asked, "Is that nurse all right? She seems to be sweating profusely." Everyone stared, and then laughed when they heard the reason. But in the theatre there's no time to dwell on personal matters, and I found it a most fascinating part of my training.
At the end of our 2-year course, we became fully qualified enrolled nurses. They sometimes say that nurses get hardened by all the sickness they see, but I found that now I'm trained, I can give so much more to a patient. Well, take Mrs. Norris, for example. Sometimes she has to struggle for breath because she's had a bad heart attack. She's got complete trust in me, for she knows I understand her illness. As well as giving her what comfort I can, I'm observing her all the time, and I'd recognize any danger signals if she should get worse. Sometimes the danger signals are dramatic. A hemorrhage from an amputated leg. There's not a moment to be lost, but the last thing the nurse wants to do is to frighten the patient. So there's no panic, but calm competence and a reassuring word. It may seem an alarming situation to a layman, but there's no real danger because the patient is under the observation of trained staff, and the doctor will be with her in a few minutes.
Nursing isn't only the healing of sick bodies. Minds become involved too, and we nurses are often able to help the patients with all kinds of personal problems which stop them from getting well as quickly as they should.
Time's up, I'm afraid. It's after 8 o'clock.
Thank you, nurse. So long then, Betty. Take care of yourself.
So long. Thanks for coming.
Could I have a word with you, nurse?
Surely. What's the trouble?
Well, Betty's acting as if she doesn't want to see me very much.
Well, she's always talking about you.
You must have got her wrong.
I wish I had. Oh, I know it's been my fault. The accident and all. Betty wanted me to give up the motorbike months ago. Of course, I've sold it now, after the damage is done.
You think she's holding it against you?
Well, she's got something on her mind. She's even talking about us breaking off the engagement.
Let me see what I can do. She's probably in a very emotional state still. She may talk to one of us where she wouldn't talk to you. It often happens like that.
Thank you, nurse.
It's true that Betty wasn't making the progress we'd hoped for, so I found an opportunity of talking to her that evening. It soon became clear that she thought she'd be scarred for life and didn't want John to think he had to marry her. I tried to reason with her, but it was more a matter for the doctor. We told him what she'd said, and he was able to explain that with modern methods of surgery, she'd be as attractive as ever in no time at all. She made great strides after that, and when she was leaving, she and John asked me to their wedding. It was sweet of them. But then you often find that patients are touching in their gratitude.
Does anyone mind if I turn up the radio? I feel like some nice, cheerful music this morning. Good morning. Good morning. Where's Mrs. Quinn?
She's gone to the bathroom.
Oh, no, she'll be there for hours. I better go and fetch her. Steady, dear. Let me get my breath. What's all the hurry? Oh, listen.
Good morning, ladies, and a very special good morning to all the nurses in Ward 4, Royal Hospital, Endon. I've got a message for you from one of your patients, Mrs. Quinn. I'll read it to you. As patients in Ward 4, we would like to convey our gratitude to all the nurses, kind and cheerful, who comfort us when we are tearful. For more than medicine and pills, their kind attention cures our ills. So please select a tune to raise their spirits and convey our praise. Well, I must say I couldn't agree with them more. I think that nurses are absolutely marvellous. Are you listening in Ward 4?
You clever old thing. So that's what you've been hatching up.
We mean it all, dear. Every word of it.